This is Blindside by DrowClericOfPelor, read by Explode Hard Podfics. This is a Kiribaku fic on Archive of Our Own with a rating of teen and up audiences. Chapter 2, Alone on the Rooftop. Bakugou's evening with Camie had been pleasant enough. His job was simple. He would sit on the edge of the dance floor while she danced with her friends, watching for Meat Boy, or Potato Boy, or whatever Kirishima wanted him to call him. In all honesty, he probably would have just sat on the sidelines the whole time anyways. When it looked like Tater Tots was trying to make a move, Bakugou would be in a good position to get to Camie first, whirling her across the dance floor to another group of friends. Or just any group of people, really. She could make friends in seconds, it seemed like. The heavily spiked punch probably helped with that. His presence alone seemed like enough of a deterrence for Potato Boy, and every jealous glare he received for his efforts was like food for his soul.
Bakugou!
Camie whined loudly, drawing out the last syllable of his name in a slurred sing-song voice.
My Baku bro! And
That's enough! Bakugou said sharply, catching her as she keeled to the side, likely saving her from face-planting on the last stair to the rooftop of the nightclub. He could tell Camie was trying to use her illusions to give him a thumbs-up emoji, but she was so drunk that the image had taken on a deep-fried look and was almost unrecognizable. The colors were off, and they wobbled almost as much as she did. She wouldn't fool anyone with these illusions, that was certain.
Bakugou,
she said more quietly.
Preach, fam.
He was reasonably certain this meant something to the effect of, thank you. They were alone on the roof, away from the rest of the party. Camie had said she wanted fresh air after, in her words, visiting bigvom.com. The roof was clearly designed to be partied on. There is a pool, though it currently had some hardtop covering on it, and a poolside bar gazebo thing that had been locked up and unstocked before they'd arrived. The floor was tile and looked like it had been swept recently, so Bakugou decided it was unlikely Camie would step on something sharp if she were barefoot. Shoes off, so you can fucking walk on your own, he grumbled. Camie nodded and started to lean down to undo the straps on her stilettos. But this was far beyond her current capabilities. Bakugou ended up having to lower her into a deck chair and untangle the needlessly complicated buckles as she giggled, kicking at him gently whenever he'd accidentally tickle her in the process. The city glittered around them, and the fresh spring breeze was a cool respite from the sweaty mess of dancing teenagers down below. Bakugou wondered why they hadn't had the party up here. For security, probably, he thought. The rooftop was open, exposed, and their location tonight was supposed to be a secret. If UA had their shit together, which Bakugou presumed they did, they'd likely have a few pro heroes watching from nearby buildings. They were probably watching him and Camie now, a thought that gave him more comfort than he expected. He scanned the skyline, trying to think of where he would place heroes if he were in charge of security. For good measure, he also checked back towards the door, looking for Potato Boy, but there was no sign of anyone.
But for realsies, though,
Camie said, leaning into him and shivering.
You're totes like the only boy I could trust with this.
Bakugou took off his embroidered suit vest and wrapped it around her shoulders. There wasn't much material to it, but it might help her warm up a little bit. Barf on this, and I'll kill you, he said with a bit of a snarl. Kirishima had bought it for him, and he was fond of it. He settled into a seat where he could keep an eye on both Camie and the door to the roof. If a certain someone decided to try and join them up here, he'd see it.
You're the first guy friend I've ever had that I can just, be friends with. You're either the most unthirstiest boy ever,
She shrugged and made another barely legible illusion appear between her hands. It looked like a sparkly rainbow with the word friendship beneath it, and was accompanied by what Bakugou assumed was supposed to be a twinkling sound effect, but it had a tinny quality to it and sounded far away.
Oh, I just think got a kind of straw. You like to sip?
Carefully, Bakugou considered the strange turn this conversation had taken. He had never been asked point blank if he was gay before, and he honestly had never thought about how he would respond. Lying about himself didn't sit right with him, but he'd always wanted to wait until he was the #1 hero, when he stood above everyone else, before coming out. Though he'd had times when he'd thought about doing it before then, and had almost gone through with it once. But being the #1 hero came first. It wouldn't matter what people would say about it then, as long as he'd risen to the top. Bakugou knew his lack of response would give Camie all the answers she needed. He liked being friends with Camie, it was true. Just friends, though. Being around people tended to tire him out, and being around Camie was no exception. He'd had fun tonight, sure, but what he was looking forward to most right now was going home alone and sleeping in past noon. Was that so abnormal? She was pretty. Anyone with eyes could tell you that. But that didn't really make much of a difference to him. The only satisfaction her good looks had brought him was when she'd first walked into the venue, and Kirishima had nearly dislocated his sharp-toothed jaw over it. Raccoon eyes had been left staring, first at Camie, then at Kirishima, then at Bakugou, and then back to Camie. As if she couldn't process what was happening. It had satisfied some of his more vengeful, petty urges. But other than that, it didn't really matter to him what Camie's face looked like. She was funny, and that's why he hung out with her. It was as simple as that. Yeah, simple. That's what friendship should be. He could look into her eyes without being worried that he might fall into them. He could laugh at her jokes without wondering if he was laughing too hard or not playing cool enough. He didn't feel the urge to overshare around her. There was no violent oscillation between wanting to open up and be vulnerable and wanting to close off and be cool and tough. He could put his arm around her to carry up the stairs to this very roof without feeling like Icarus, flying too close to the sun, doomed to crash and burn as soon as the touch ended. And he knew that when the limo dropped her off at home for the night, he would feel content, satisfied with the time he'd spent with her, rather than hungry for more. He'd had a friendship like that with Kirishima once, but somewhere along the line things had changed, and Bakugou couldn't tell whether something had been lost or gained. Had it changed when he'd grabbed Kirishima's hand in his mad scramble to escape the League that night at Kamano? Had it been when Potato Boy had used Kirishima like a human shield against him, and Bakugou had been forced to choose between him and the victory he craved so much? Or maybe it had changed when... Bakugou didn't really want to dwell on it, and scanned the rooftop for threats again. There was nothing, obviously, but Camie had let the colorful smoke she used in her illusions drift all over the roof, and was entertaining herself by populating the deck chairs with images of people and cartoon characters, their forms rendered unrecognizable by the wobbly deep fry. She really had a wide area of effect if given enough time to let her smoke diffuse. A powerful quirk, Bakugou thought, even if it was useless right now.
Illusions,
Bakugou started.
They're hiding up here because you were the one who spiked the punch, right?
Camie sat up sharply as a bunch of distorted exclamation and question marks popped up around her head before floating away and fading.
How'd you know?
Bakugou shrugged.
It's obvious.
There were other students that could have probably hidden themselves well enough, but only Camie's quirk could have masked every visual or auditory signal of the crime, while also leaving an illusory Camie on the dance floor to give her an alibi. Of course, since she was the only one who could pull off a perfect heist like this, all the teachers would know it was her too. Camie leaned back in her deck chair, smug.
Guilt is charged, Your Honor.
Bakugou wrestled with his curiosity before letting it get the better of him. How'd you get it into the building? You didn't carry it in your little purse, did you? Aizawa had been helping with security at the door and had been canceling the quirks of anyone who walked in, presumably to stop this exact thing from happening. The only thing she'd carried in was a clutch bag, and Erasure hadn't found any glamour on it.
It's called a clutch, sweaty.
I know it's called a clutch, damn
And
it.
it was super on fleek with my outfit, BT dubs, except for the fact that it wasn't a clutch at all. The whole thing was actually a huge flask, and they never checked inside it.
She used her illusions to write top-tier door security in the air above her, followed a few seconds later by, as expected of UA, the large impact font being the only reason it was legible. By now, Bakugou was fairly certain he knew where at least one of the pro heroes watching them was situated. He'd seen movement in a darkened office building across the street and 5 floors up. If it was someone doing some serious overtime, they'd at least have kept the lights on. Far more likely, it was someone on the UA or Shiketsu's security team who didn't want to draw attention to themselves. Silently, the door to the rooftop opened, revealing one scrawny, purple-haired figure in the shadows. Potato Boy. Bakugou was glad he had kept the door in this field of view.
Illusions.
He murmured.
We got company.
Her face fell, reacting to the concern in his voice before she even saw her creepy little stalker blocking the exit.
Get up,
he said, supporting her as she stumbled to her feet before pulling her close. They were supposed to look like a couple to deter him from making any moves, and so far it had worked. Until now.
You look a little lost.
Bakugou called out across the rooftop, tempted to follow up with some trash talk about how Potato Boy's eyes were too small to find the way back from the toilet. But that would just be throwing sparks into a powder keg right now. With some difficulty, he decided against it and instead opted for a sarcastic,
The hell do you want?
Potato Boy closed the door behind him.
I pondered away half the night, wondering why such an honorable, well-educated, classy Shiketsu student, such as Miss Utsushimi, would disguise herself as a painted whore and associate with a loathsome thug such as yourself. She might not be too perspicacious, but she's not the kind of female who is easily swayed by broad shoulders or a chiseled jawline.
Bakugou had to choose between fighting his own rising temper and fighting to keep his laughter back. The biggest loser of the fight was his enamel, as he ground his teeth under the effort. Potato Boy continued.
But I believe I've uncovered the truth behind this paradox. You must have done something to coerce her. Threats or perhaps blackmail.
There was a hard edge in his voice, like he was trying to sound calm, but he could burst into tears or violence at the slightest provocation. Slowly, deliberately, Potato Boy began walking towards them, hands behind his back. So we can't see if he's using his quirk, thought Bakugou. Is this a bluff? Or did he really intend to fight here? Bakugou definitely itched for a good fight. Aggression bubbled up inside him in response to Potato Boy's own, and it had been so long since he'd been allowed to go all out on someone. But he'd only just gotten his provisional license a few months ago, and didn't want to have UA ban him from his second internship as punishment for blowing their security deposit on the rented nightclub up in smoke. There was also the added burden of Camie, inebriated and unable to use her quirk properly. As much as he didn't like it, it would be better if Bakugou talked him down somehow, and this whole situation didn't get physical. Or would it? How certain was he that there really were pro-heroes watching them right now? Certain enough to risk provoking Potato Boy? If Tater Tots attacked first, Bakugou could probably retaliate as hard as he wanted and avoid any blame as long as he kept the collateral damage reasonable. Maybe it would also get the Shiketsu staff to finally do something about Potato Boy's harassment. But that all banked on there actually being a security detail nearby to witness Potato Boy making the first move. And on Bakugou being able to survive what Potato Boy would do to him in that move.
I had intended to confront Miss Utsushimi about your crimes afterwards, to avoid making a scene during these frivolous end-of-the-year festivities. But I have now been enlightened to my own misjudgment. All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. Bakugou, you got her intoxicated and then brought her up here to take advantage of her, did you not?
No, you've got it wrong. That's not how it is.
Camie called out, anger forming a thin veneer over the fear in her voice. But it was useless. Her words did nothing to stop his advance. If anything, Potato Boy only looked angrier.
I may not know the method by which he is manipulating you, Miss Utsushimi, but fear not. I have arrived to stop evil from triumphing this day.
The weight of Bakugou's choices had hung in the air more thickly than Camie's illusory smoke. But, like a stiff breeze, Potato Boy's accusation blew away any doubts in Bakugou's mind. He had even stopped grinding his teeth in surprise. Potato Boy had managed to convince himself with absolute certainty that he was in the right. You couldn't talk someone down from that. In all fairness, Bakugou hadn't thought about what it would have looked like to an outside observer, with Camie so drunk she could barely stand up and him completely sober. Even someone who wasn't looking for ill intent might have gotten suspicious. It was going to be a fight, whether Bakugou wanted one or not. And fuck if Bakugou couldn't use a good fight right now. Bakugou considered pushing her away from him, so he could fight more freely, but instead pulled her closer in a way that he hoped was reassuring, and would provoke Potato Boy into making a shoddy first attack. Tater Tots took the bait, grimacing at his action, his face twisted as he shouted,
She's not your human shield, Bakugou!
Human shield? For just a moment, Bakugou's chest tightened and he saw red. He could feel his temper sliding out of his control. He could regain control easily once he started fighting, but he had to wait for the right moment or he'd ruin everything. All he could do was grit his teeth and bear it. Bakugou had always felt that his head was clearest when he was fighting, and his fight with Potato Boy back at the provisional license exam had been no different. When Potato Boy had held Kirishima hostage, Bakugou's decision to turn down the firepower of his AP shot had been a conscious, calculated decision, rather than an emotional one. When he'd focused most of his attention in front of him, on Kirishima and the asshole using him as a human shield, rather than on the sneak attack from behind that ultimately did him in, he'd done so intentionally. He'd been lucid, painfully aware that his actions were chipping away at his odds of victory, and in those precious few moments of clarity, he knew it was all worth it. Never before had Bakugou considered that he would love something, or someone, more than winning. But from then on, he couldn't deny his feelings. He loved Kirishima. He loved him even more than victory. That line of thinking wasn't new, but it still felt like dragging a nail across his heart. He didn't want to think of Kirishima as antagonistic to his goal of being number one. They were both strongest when they fought side by side, fighting styles completing each other as perfectly as their lives did. But in that fight, there was no way he could deny Kirishima had been his Achilles heel. In a fight without him, though, maybe Bakugou could beat this potato guy. There, he saw it. Behind the Potato Boy were the little globs of flesh floating along the ground, away towards the edges of the roof. Tater Tots had probably gotten better at controlling his quirk if he could make this many of them. He would probably send them to loop around, below the rooftop, and attack from behind like he had back at the exam. Small as they were, the flush balls would be hard to see in the darkness. He hoped that he'd be able to see them before they hit, and that the pro heroes watching would see it too. Camie was not so passive, however. She pushed away from him and took a few unstable steps towards Potato Boy.
I'm not his human shield, Shishikura.
Don't defend him! I'm doing this for you!
Potato Boy screamed.
You want to do something for me? Then do this. Leave me the fuck alone!
Camie screamed back, tears springing to her eyes. That was all it took. The hair trigger of Potato Boy's patience had been tripped. Bakugou watched as a surge of tiny meatballs flowed up all over the sides of the nightclub towards them. Maybe Camie saw it too, maybe not. But as Bakugou lunged forward, grabbed her, and rocketed upwards, the air around Potato Boy's face exploded into flashing lights and grainy, distorted colors. Potato Boy doubled over, trying to escape his new, loud, deep-fried reality, but the area of effect of Camie's illusions was too large. So Camie might not be able to fool people with her illusions, but that didn't mean she was useless. Bakugou could work with that. They landed on top of the poolside gazebo as quietly as Bakugou could manage, which was to say not quietly at all. But it seemed like Potato Boy hadn't heard them over the staticky party anthems Camie was blasting directly into his ears. It was a steep incline, however, and wasn't covered in a surface that was good for grip. Bakugou scrambled to grab the pointed top of the gazebo while still hanging onto Camie, who was rage-crying so hard her mascara had already made it halfway down her face. If he let go and she fell off the roof, he wasn't sure she could maintain control over her illusions. How much longer until the pro heroes intervene? Below them, the meatwads swarmed around the spot they had been standing, like moths around a lamp. Bakugou watched as their dance grew slower, calmer. Then they began circling outward. Blinded though he may be, Potato Boy wasn't out of the fight yet. He intended to find them by feel. It was really obvious people were using their quirks up here. Why hadn't the heroes stopped this yet? Bakugou thought of how easily Camie had snuck the alcohol into the dance. He thought of the time Charge Dolt had left his school ID card in his dorm and managed to make it all the way to class, past 3 security checkpoints before he noticed. He thought of the tax at USJ and summer camp. How much of UA security was just security theater, no more real than the things Camie made with her quirk? What if there were no pro heroes watching them?
Camie, I'm gonna need you to hand me my phone,
Bakugou said, his eyes on the window where he'd seen the person moving before.
It's in the left inside pocket of my vest.
Camie sniffled before asking.
You're gonna call the teachers?
I am.
Camie shook her head.
No!
No? The fuck do you mean no? This is serious.
I'm gonna get in trouble.
She whispered between hiccuping sobs.
What? Are you actually more scared of what the teachers will do to you over a dumb prank than what this potato motherfucker is about to do to us right now? Give me my fucking phone, Camie.
He shook her a little bit, but not enough that it might break her concentration on her quirk. Camie seemed to consider his words, but not quickly enough. The first glob of meat plopped on the roof of the gazebo, little more than a meter away from them. They were out of time. He blasted off from the roof and tried to search for the window where he'd seen movement earlier. He couldn't see anyone now, but he'd counted the floors and they'd been in a corner office. It was difficult to propel himself with only one hand, and Camie's extra weight didn't help. Before he reached the correct window, Camie slipped slightly in his grasp before he caught her again, and the sudden shift in their combined center of mass sent them careening alongside the office building before he could get control again. Resigned to the loss of UA's security deposit, Bakugou broke one of the large double-paned office windows with his quirk before flying inside. It was dark and silent, filled with a labyrinth of felt-coated cubicle walls, rolling desk chairs, and black computer monitors. He hoisted Camie over one shoulder as the broken glass crunched under his shoes.
Hello?
He called out. Camie started clamoring to escape his grasp.
Like, what the fuck are you doing?
She hissed.
Don't fucking struggle. There's broken glass.
She could cut her feet. Camie stopped trying to get down, but asked again.
Oh, what are you doing?
The cubicle walls seemed to do little to dampen the sound of her voice, which was eerily loud.
I can't even right now.
Bakugou made his way towards the corner office and kicked open the door. There, in the high-backed office chair, sat a pro-hero Bakugou didn't recognize. She was surrounded by equipment that was still monitoring the situation on the roof of the nightclub. Camie's illusory blind had slipped off Potato Boy, and he was frantically searching for them. But the pro-hero wasn't looking at any of her equipment right now, because she was face down in her keyboard. Camie slid off his shoulders and leaned on him heavily as she got her feet under her.
Miss Depth Charge?
Her voice seemed even more unsteady than her legs. There was no answer, no breathing, no pulse.
Camie, I'm gonna need you to hand me my phone.
Yeah. Okay.
End chapter 2.